Robots clean gutters, vacuum floors, wash our windows, dance for our amusement, make for incredibly clean pets, and have even been roped into teaching our kids. Suckers. But well before Fritz Lang's Metropolis, a world full of robotic assistants had already captured the human imagination. Greek myths of Hephaestus say that he built the giant bronze guardian Talos for King Minos of Minotaur fame. As mechanical clocks became more common in the 15th and 16th centuries, automatons flourished and found homes in everything from religious services to drinking games. These aren't robots in the modern sense of the word, sure, but it's a pretty clear line from Al-Jazari's elaborate 12th century hand-washing machines to the Roomba that cleans your floor without human interference. By the 19th century, Charles Babbage was creating machines capable of performing complex mathematical calculations, and Nikola Tesla was showing off a remote-controlled boat. Tesla imagined militarized swarms of his telautomatons armed with warheads. This violent vision, combined with the growing intelligence of machines like Babbage's difference engine, posed a moral dilemma. Isaac Asimov was inspired partially by that looming danger and the science fiction tales of Adam Link, a self-aware robot, to write the laws of robotics. In 1950, Alan Turing explored the growing intelligence of robots further by outlining a test that could determine when a computer had learned to think, just like a human.
You make up these questions, Mr. Holden? They write them down for you.
Meanwhile, robot research marched forward. Okay, shuffled forward. Or rolled.
She automatically runs home to her kennel for charging up.
Anyway, by 1964, robots had found their niche on the factory floor. The Unimate was the first of the industrial robots, and General Motors put it to work on the assembly line, leading the way for human-free manufacturing. The 1960s were a golden age for fictional robots.
Silence, you preening popinjay!
But more importantly, a pioneering era for computer science. The Stanford Research Institute built Shaky, the first robot that was able to understand and navigate its environment. And MIT had its own artificial intelligence darling in Eliza, an early example of natural language processing that eventually inspired Siri.
Show my photos from last June in San Francisco. Oh yeah.
But in the 70s and 80s, as the recession set in and factory automation meant less jobs for low-skilled workers, the popular representation of robots turned bleak.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Dystopian visions of a future where robots were our enemy and not our friends became the norm. Maybe a little over the top, guys. But in the 1990s, IBM's Deep Blue supercomputer showed just what artificial intelligence was capable of. It defeated world chess champion Garry Kasparov in their first matchup, though Kasparov's subsequent 3 victories and 2 draws showed the machines just who is still in charge. By 2000, humanoids started to take off. Honda introduced a walking assistant called Asimo that mimicked human form and motion, and with each successive model it only became faster, smarter, and more human-like. In the past 2 decades, robots have helped humans reach the depths of the ocean and the far reaches of Mars. They can assist in surgeries and even make hazardous jobs safer. NASA's Robonauts have been launched into space to help perform dangerous tasks, while on Earth, DARPA's robotic challenges have led to the rise of machines that could help or even replace first responders. These self-balancing, or well, not so self-balancing bots could potentially save lives. While fully functional rescue robots are still a ways out, machines that can make everyday tasks easier have already earned their way into our homes and factories. In 2002, iRobot launched the first automated vacuum cleaner, and a decade later, Rethink Robotics introduced a cheery-faced factory worker called Baxter that performs simple tasks on a production line. Whether these machines will be our iron-fisted overlords or obedient helpers is still up in the air, but for now, their ability to aid and augment our lives is undeniable.
And we're back. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Gorman. I'm the editor-in-chief of Engadget. And in case you couldn't tell from the video, we're here to talk about robots. And joining me on stage, we have Associate Editor Mona Lawani. Hi, Mona. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you.
And also, we have Colin Angle, the CEO and co-founder of iRobot, and Jim Lawton, the Chief Product and Marketing Officer of Rethink Robotics. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. How you doing?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So what did y'all, as experts in the field, what did you think of the video?
You know, it's
it points out the fact that robots are not a new idea.
Yeah.
And we've been dreaming of figuring out how to make robots an important part of our lives for well over 50 years. And it's exciting. And I think we've come a long way and at the same time disappointingly made incredibly small amounts of progress against the dream that they had back 50 years ago.
Right. What about you, Jim?
I thought it was a great video.
Yeah?
Who doesn't love robots, right? So.
That's right. That's right.
So both of your robots actually make an appearance in this video because I feel like any retrospective of robotics would be so incomplete without Roomba and Baxter. So just to start with, I'd love to sort of do a quick recap of what led to these iconic machines. So Colin, if you could sort of walk us through what sparked the idea for Roomba.
Well, I think you had Rosie up on your video. I mean, when we first started iRobot, I would introduce myself. Hello, I'm Colin Angle, CEO of iRobot. And the response was ridiculously predictable and unusual. Before the person I introduced myself would even say, "Good to meet you, Colin," they would say, "When are you going to clean my floors?" And I would bet people, and they'd take my bet because that's kind of rude. And yet, it completely would happen every time. So the idea of Roomba wasn't hard. Everyone was saying this was the expectation. Robots are supposed to clean our homes. The challenge, of course, was the price point. How do you make it actually work? If you build a robot that kind of cleans your floors, but not up to the standards that you and I expect, well, then it's a cool demonstration and not really a product. And so that truly was the product. It wasn't, the spark was always there. The challenge was making it real.
And Jim, what about kind of collaborative robots? That's more your forte. So how did we go from kind of the gigantic industrial robot that we saw up there to kind of these ones that are more capable of working with humans?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, for us, it was really, you go into an automotive factory and you can see a big robot welding a piece of metal or moving a big car around. Most factories have people in them, and so you couldn't use a robot because the robots would have to be in a cage, because if they weren't in a cage, they'd kill somebody.
Right.
And so we really took a look at it and said, there's got to be a way to build a robot that doesn't need to be in a cage. And that really is what led us to, how would you think about doing that? And our first one was Baxter that we released a couple of years ago.
So what was like the single biggest challenge of getting it out of the cage, if there was one, or was there just a whole host of problems that you had to fix?
For the most part, people have built robots essentially as a connected set of rods. They're very strong, hard. If you bump into something, you break it. If you bump into a human, you hurt it.
Yeah.
We're not built that way. You and I are basically a big bunch of springs. I mean, our arms flex. If I bump into the table, it'll give. My arm will give.
Right.
So we really designed the robot in a very different way. We built it with a bunch of springs.
Yeah.
And so you can bump into things, and it'll be okay.
Cool.
You know, every year at CES, we see a crazy number of robots. They're just crawling all over the place. But realistically, where are we really at? Are we ready to sort of welcome them into our homes and factories? Are we there yet?
You know, we are at the beginning of practical robots. And, but we are making progress. If you think about the Roomba, we've sold over 15 million. About 15% of all money spent on vacuum cleaners is now spent on robot vacuum cleaners. And in Spain, it's the #1 selling vacuum. So we truly have obsoleted upright vacuuming. The vacuuming solution of the future is a Roomba to clean your floor and maybe a hand vac to do the, your upholstery or curtains and so forth. And that's really it. And so we're at the point of getting a few wins. And Roomba is probably the, in the outside of the commercial space, the biggest win by far that we've achieved. But that's one out of countless numbers that we'll see in the next couple decades.
What about industrial bots? Where are we at with that?
Yeah, so we're really just started. I mean, most robots today are sold in automotive. Most robots, people haven't been able to be around, and so it really is at the very beginning. I think we've got 90% of all manufacturing tasks can't get done by a robot today cost effectively. So there's more robots to be deployed than have been deployed in the entire history of robotics.
And I mean, historically, in what ways would you say home bots and industrial bots, in what ways have they pushed robotics along over the decades?
Well, the challenge in consumer robots was getting the price point and the functionality up to the level where the value of the services they provided was above the cost of the robot. And that really was that breakthrough, this price performance challenge. Because, you know, Rosie the robot, the idea of a robot that could clean my house isn't new. The follow-up question to when are you going to clean the floors from my first remark, because I would be miffed by this, I would say, how much are you willing to pay? Because I could do it for $5,000, and it's like, well, if I could spend $5,000 on a vacuuming robot, I could hire someone to clean my house for you. And so what's happened over the years is an increase in the ability to go and have a battery-powered device actually do a very effective job cleaning, and then a decrease in the cost of the batteries and the microprocessors and some of the componentry required to allow that to happen.
The way I look at it, you could have a robot that I could bring home to mom.
Right.
To get a robot for mom, what does she want?
Yeah.
I mean, she thinks that Python is a snake, not a programming language, right? So you've got to be able to show the robot how to do what it's doing, not program it. It's got to be cheap, and it, you know, can't hurt my mom.
So when you're kind of making machines to work with mankind, kind of what are the features that really you're focused on? So, like, are you worried about the form factor so it doesn't look like some murder bot that's coming to kill you or something like that? Obviously, you were talking about kind of building it with springs, but what sorts of, I feel like especially the appearance of them is something that maybe isn't first that comes to mind, but I mean, does that kind of thing matter? Like, what are the elements that you're looking for when you're evaluating how they need to look and operate?
So that for us with Roomba, we wanted to do two things. We didn't want to make it look like a toy. And so, you know, it was small. It wasn't what people expected a vacuum cleaning robot to look like, because people expected us to build a humanoid that pushed an upright vacuum cleaner. So we had to make it look powerful, real, and effective. And so that was very, very important. And then, of course, there's an aesthetic that a well-designed product also needs to convey, to make it something that you would, a customer seeing it on the shelf would say, "Ooh, I like that." And so that bring those two, design and seriousness together, ultimately created the Roomba. It's interesting, over 85% of the people who own Roomba do name it. But if you don't own it, and I ask you if you might name it, you actually will be upset at me. Why would I ever name my vacuum? That's crazy. And so that we would talk about, well, should we make it easily customizable so that, because everyone likes to name it? Yeah. The answer was no. It needs to be a serious looking appliance. Yeah. Leave the naming for week 2 of ownership.
So does this mean, are we going to see some Roombas with like bunny ears to encourage people to name them?
You know, we don't have to do that. You would be amazed at what people do to their Roombas. Well, some just have their bunnies ride on the Roomba.
Right, I've seen that. I saw a chicken on a Roomba the other day. God bless the internet. Whoever did that, good job.
Yes, yeah, good on the internet for that.
Yeah. And Jim, what about you? Like, Workspace, do you have to consider like what they look like, or is it really just like make sure that they react appropriately?
Our number one criteria was when you open up the box, the guy wants to go toward the robot, not run the other direction. Okay. And so there was a lot of thought that went into how do you make a robot that somebody wants to be around? Yeah. Right. How do you make a robot that you're comfortable around and you can trust the robot? Yeah. If you think it's going to hurt you, you're going to back away from it. You're not going to go toward it. And so that was a big part of our design process.
Yeah. Right. So when you're looking at the kind of functions and the capabilities of the robots, where do you start from? Is it like, this is a task that people hate doing, we can fix that? Or is it more like, we can't do this and we need a machine to be able to do it? Like,
well, I think it depends on the mission you're on. In consumer robot design, we actually have a graph. It's how often does a particular task have to be done, and how hated is that task? And so vacuuming is done very frequently and is relatively disliked. And so that's the right quadrant, and that was an early one. Scrubbing floors. It's hated so much, it's actually done less frequently than it should be.
Okay.
But that's another good one that we try to do. Of course, practicality has to come into it. Folding laundry for me would be a great robot a task or a robot to take on, but that requires
I think there's one of those here, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just saw one in the South Hall that actually exists.
There you go.
Yeah. The God, I forget what it was called, the laundry robot or something.
But it has to do it as the other challenge, of course, is that the bar is human level performance.
Right.
And so that you would be amazed how fast people can fold laundry. And so that the challenge there is pretty quick. So I haven't seen this new robot. I'll have to go check it out.
Yeah. And what about you, Jim? I mean, is it just like, we can't do this, we're picking up super heavy parts, we need robots, or is there other ways you approach it?
You know, a lot of our customers have struggled to keep people in manufacturing jobs. There's an estimate out there that by 2020, there are going to be 2 million manufacturing jobs that are not filled because most people don't want to do them. I mean, you guys are millennials. You don't want to be doing manufacturing jobs. Most of your audience is millennials. They don't want to be doing manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
So we start to work with companies and say, what are the jobs that you need people to fill? And so they may be jobs that, you know, are unsafe jobs, like, you know, putting your hands in and around press brakes where you can get your hand broken off, or they're dead end from a career perspective, like you can't actually learn new skills to grow. And so we really use our customers as a guide to say, what are the kinds of things that you're having trouble attracting people into that maybe a robot could do?
Right. You know, we spoke a little bit about form and function right now. It's just something I think about a lot. I feel like you see robots changing all the time. They're coming in all sorts of shapes and sizes. But what about the function? Are robots just better at doing one task at a time? Like Baxter and Sawyer, for instance. Like they're super focused, super precise. Are they just better at doing one task as opposed to multitasking? Is that why they're made like that?
You know, actually, for a long time, robots were, you put them in place once, you had them do that job forever and ever and ever. One of the real breakthroughs has been, we started to stop thinking about robots as a bunch of hardware parts and started thinking them as about software-enabled devices. And when you start to think about them as a software-driven product, there's nothing stopping me from training it to do one task today and do another one tomorrow. One of the reasons why so many people have been able to take advantage of robots has been, well, today I'm building parts for one company and tomorrow I'm building parts for another company. If I put in a robot that can only do one thing, then I can't run my factory anymore. And so a critical component has been, how can we use software to be able to make these robots so that they can switch what they do?
Right. And I feel like a lot of the discussions around robotics in general just sort of go in this direction of talking about the strengths of the robots, right? But they're also deeply flawed right now. I mean, like we saw in the video, they're wobbly on their feet, they need a ton of human assistance. But there's still this sort of strong sense of fear around robots. I was just wondering what your take is on, you know, I mean, are robots going to sort of kick us out of our homes at some point or sort of take over our jobs?
Some of the jobs, right? We already talked about that, but it's the ones we don't want. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I think as you start to think about, I mean, if you were to look at in 1900, what are people doing? The vast majority of what people were doing were farming.
Yep.
And we got much better at it. And so now we can feed people and we don't need as many people that are farming. If you jump 100 years from now, they're going to be doing a bunch of stuff that we haven't even dreamed of yet. And so there's this constant kind of changing through technology, allowing us to do the things that we're excited about and doing a lot less of what it is that we're not excited about. So I think we're gonna see that, and people are going to create new ways of doing things and new jobs that they haven't thought of before. And I think that creates opportunity.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, you know, we get that question a lot, and I kind of smile and say, you know, that's the wrong question. Because this idea that one day I'm going to wake up and there's going to be a knock on my door, I'm going to open up the door and there's going to be a robot and says, hi, you're obsolete now, I'm taking your job.
Yeah.
The future, unfortunately, is going to be far stranger. The technology that we're developing, and some of what you can see here at the show, you know, you can, if you lose your hearing, you can get a cochlear implant and get an artificial ear. There's now technology, if I go blind in an eye, we're starting to make artificial eyes that, at least at this point, you can start to see differentiate between light and dark with that artificial eye. Arms that you can use, have neural interfaces so that we can go and help someone who's lost their arm to go actually have a new one.
Yeah.
Now, what happens when people have elective surgery to remove their eye because the robot eye works better, or the ear works better, or the legs work better? There's going to be questions as to what is human and what is robot. And this is all going to happen long before that knock on the door that I just described happens. And so it's an interesting question. It's an easy one to ask, aren't we afraid of being obsoleted? But the trajectory that technology is on is a far more interesting one that will create all sorts of new moral challenges, but also will advance our capabilities in ways that we've only begun to imagine.
All right, well, that's all the time that we have, so thank you very much for joining me on stage. Stay tuned, y'all. We've got more coming here live from CES 2016. See ya.